All right. So welcome to our 5th week of the Real Librarianship series. And today we are featuring government libraries. And I'm very excited for this panel. I am Olivia Morris of Metronet. I'm the one that sends the endless amount of emails that you're getting about these events. And with us today is Ann Walker-Smalley, the Metronet director, as well as our panel who will introduce themselves in just a moment. On your screen, you see the upcoming dates that we have. Those are the ones that will finish out 2020, and then we have a whole slate of new ones that we will start in 2021, and you'll be getting information about those soon. Keep an eye on Metro Briefs for more information. And also there is a link to the evaluation for this event, and I will be sending that out to all of our attendees tomorrow, but if you want to grab it now, you are more than welcome to do so. So thank you for attending, and please know that we want to hear your questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and hit the chat or the Q&A feature at any time. Jump in with your questions and we'll take those as they come in. Meanwhile, we do have some prepared questions and we will be asking those of our panelists. So our first question is to introduce yourself. Tell us what your current job title is, where it is that you work, where you went to school, and then give us an overview of the path that you took to get to where you are today. And I'm going to begin with Drew.
Okay. Well, thanks, Olivia, very much. I am Drew Frickberg, and I refer to myself as a librarian for the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And that is a state agency that goes by its acronym DEED. And I usually work out of the headquarters in downtown St. Paul in the First National Bank building. But I'm working remotely like a lot of lucky people. And I have been Deed's librarian now for over 14 years. I came from a series of different library jobs. This is my first government librarianship experience, but I had also worked at Iowa State University at the School of Journalism and Communication Library. And then before that, I worked in public libraries.
Wow. Thank you very much, Drew.
Where did you go to library school, Drew?
Sorry, I forgot that question. I went to, went to Indiana University and got a degree in journalism and criminal justice. And I worked in newspapers the first couple of years out of college. And then I went to graduate school and got my MLS from IU in Bloomington, Indiana.
Oh, newspapers.
Yeah.
Well, that's something we have in common, Drew. My undergraduate degree is also in criminal justice. So
okay. I thought you were going to say journalism because it seems like there's a lot of librarians with that background, but yeah.
There is, but no, there's fewer with the criminal justice background, except in the law library world. You see it more there.
Yeah, I bet.
Thank you so much. Catherine.
Yes, I'm Catherine Durvage. I am the library program director at the Minnesota Braille and Talking Book Library. You may, for those of you that have been here in Minnesota for a while, it may have more resonated with you as Minnesota Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped. That's what it was called when I first started at this job. I've been doing this since 1999. I have been working in library since I was a junior in high school. In some capacity or other, I have worked in libraries. So the path to this job probably seemed to be natural. I worked in college libraries. My first professional job out of library school, which I attended the University of Iowa in Iowa City and got my master's degree in library and information science there, was an assistant director in a public library in Mason City, Iowa, the hometown of Meredith Willson and the Music Man, for those of you that are familiar with the musical. So I've just naturally progressed. I worked at the Cedar Rapids Public Library in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, as they called them information specialists at the time. Just a sundry of tasks, help people use the library, answer calls and stuff. But around 1998, 1999, I interviewed for this job, knew nothing about it. And 20 years later, I'm still here. So.
Wow, thank you so much. And Tiffany.
Hey everyone. So I'm Tiffany. I'm coming from a distance, and I I am wearing my little NASA shirt today, although I don't have a great virtual background because I have a 5-year-old and husband in the other room and bandwidth issues. So my name's Tiffany Smith. I'm the Chief Knowledge Officer for Aeronautics Research at NASA. I've been with NASA for about 3 years. Before that, I was at the Department of State for about 11 and also worked at the White House Office of Management and Budget and General Services Administration. I received my Master's of Science in Library Science with Olivia from Catholic University back in 2007. So I really thought I wanted to be a children's librarian, and somehow that was not where I ended up. And it's been sort of an interesting path. So every once in a while, I still sort of dream of being a children's librarian. And if anyone joining in is a children's librarian, I would be happy to volunteer at any time. So I do really enjoy my job. I've had some great experiences, and I'm looking forward to talking more about it.
Great. Thank you so much. I also, for the record, was going to be a children's librarian back when we were in library school. So that didn't really work out for either one of us, but I think we did okay. So let's go to question number 2. So pretend that you're speaking with someone who has never heard of a library before. Now describe your job. Catherine, I'm gonna let you go first.
Sure. I guess I would probably describe my job as, most days it seems like being a fireman, putting out fires. It just seems like in the last 20 years in the job, I have had to tackle many different things. We've gone through strikes, state employee strikes. We've had some shutdowns. I've had a flood. So I think my job from day to day in the library is just wearing many different hats and trying to just deal with whatever comes up. So you have to kind of get used to having a lot of different variety of activities and stuff. But on a normal day, I'm supervising employees, I'm answering calls from patrons, I'm doing the administrative work that a library director does, the budgeting, the management, trying to advocate for the program, do outreach. So there's just lots of different things, but I think recently, given our current, what we're dealing with in the world, it seems like I'm putting out a lot of fires right now, just trying to keep the service up and running.
So Catherine, can you give us a brief overview of the library? Maybe not everybody is as familiar with the Braille and Talking Book Library.
Yeah, the Braille and Talking Book Library is I call it a public library. We are a special library. We serve individuals who, because of a visual or physical disability, cannot read print. So we provide material free of charge in various formats: audio, Braille, large print, and now electronic download of materials. We serve primarily people that are 60, 65 years or older, because most of the people we serve lose their sight later in life. But we also serve children. We have material kindergarten on up in terms of type of materials. Most of what we do is, I would call it kind of a books by mail service. So we provide services through the US Postal Service, but in the last 10 years, we've offered digital download or mobile apps where people can go and download material and listen to them through smartphones or smart devices. And I would say what you would find in our collection is what you would find in a public library in terms of reading material. We have bestsellers, we have fiction, nonfiction, children's book, young adult. So, so we have lots of different types of books in our collection. That's why I kind of call us a public library, because we provide the same type of material you would find if you went into a public library. We have newspapers, we have magazines. So yeah, and we send everything out, like I said, free of charge. And so it's, sorry, my computer popped up here. Yeah, lost my train of thought, sorry. So yeah, I think that's that pretty much describes our service.
Thanks.
Wonderful. Tiffany.
Sure. So I actually kind of get versions of this question a lot, and in terms of what exactly are you doing here, and how are you planning to help me? And one of the things that I think about a lot is actually that a large part of my role is helping. It differs depending on the context in terms of what my job looks like to other people. So my overall mission as the Chief Knowledge Officer is to, the way that we've defined it in terms of what we're doing for NASA Aeronautics Research is to really help advance the way that we share information across NASA research centers, help researchers to get the information that they need, support what we call mission-focused learning, so kind of the sense of professional expertise development in NASA researchers, and also to what we describe as kind of enhanced consistency and coherence. It's the sense that in large organizations, sometimes what you will find is that information is not always entirely consistent from one person to another. And so trying to find ways to make sort of central information available to, in our case, a 3,000 plus workforce sort of across the United States, trying to make sure that they all have one single source of truth on that information, especially when it's guiding what their research ought to do. That's something that is part of my job. In addition, I also am the information technology manager for our mission directorate, and I cover performance reporting, which is kind of a whole nother set of things, but they all sort of relate to librarianship in kind of an interesting way.
And just so I can say before I forget, I think Chief Knowledge Officer is one of the coolest titles I've ever heard. It just sounds very cool. Thank you so much, Tiffany. Drew.
Yeah, so I guess how I would describe what I do to someone unfamiliar would be that I am the designated specialized librarian for DEED, the agency. And so in that regard, I provide research assistance and library services to the 1,500 people that work for DEED, as well as to a certain extent the governor's office and DEED partners. And maybe I should step back and talk about the role of DEED. We are the state's economic development agency, and so our mission is to empower the growth of Minnesota's economy for everyone. So that includes producing jobs and strengthening the state's workforce. So that means that my clients are co-workers that are working in like the Minnesota Trade Office and in the career force centers scattered throughout the state, and those who are working with small business owners to help them start and grow their businesses, and the vocational rehabilitation counselors are helping people with disabilities find work and develop work skills and that sort of thing. So I always try to tell people that what I aspire to do is to help my coworkers work faster and smarter so they can better serve their clients, do their work, and pursue professional development.
Wonderful. And we have a question in the chat, which is, how have your jobs changed over the years? So through technology or just time or even the pandemic, how has your job changed over the years? So Drew, I've got you up. Why don't I let you tackle that first?
I definitely would say that the DEED library has become more and more digital. Before the pandemic, we still had a physical space, but the physical space was really for my colleagues to come and have meetings, meet with clients, kind of hotel if they were on site for meetings and training. It was also a place for media interviews, and members of the public could come for who were, requesting data practices materials. So it wasn't so much about preserving a collection, a physical collection because we had already well transitioned to online journals, digital news subscriptions, databases and things like that. So I guess the main, we've just become more and more digitized over time.
So there's no physical collection anymore at all?
There is a small physical collection that just is not growing. And if anything has been underscored during the pandemic is there just hasn't been a demand for books from my clientele. It's mostly for articles, whether it's news articles, business articles, or academic journal research articles.
So 14 years ago when you started, Drew, was there a big physical collection?
There was more of a physical collection. But now, we would still get like journals in print. And now journals are becoming more and more available, digitized. And that sure has been a lot easier on me to just send PDFs of articles that my colleagues are requesting rather than going ahead and scanning and sending them. Some key reference sources definitely have become digital over that time. So there's no more photocopying and emailing or sending stuff. So yeah, okay. Our agency is really much about the here and now, not so much historical research and information,
okay,
but more news and company information where the timeliness is really of the greatest importance.
Great, thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, I would say when I first started at the library, we still had 33 RPM records and cassettes. And since then, our record collection is gone. Our cassette collection is being disposed of almost daily now. That format's not being produced anymore for our collection. And very soon, we will likely not have a physical audiobook collection over time because technology is now allowing us to download the audiobook files from the internet and either send them out to people on a cartridge. It's customized to their reading interest. So we wouldn't need to have a physical collection ready to pull off the shelf. If somebody wants all the Harry Potter books sent to them, we can put all of them on a cartridge and send them to them in one fell swoop. We wouldn't need to pull the 7, 8, 9, whatever books there are in the series and send them individually. So I think what's changed, as Drew said, is that it's gone more to digital, and we have the collection is being distributed that way. We also have mobile apps. So for those folks that want independent access to our collection, have a smartphone, tablet, access to the internet, they can get all of our collection electronically without even contacting us for anything. And I think next year, 2021, we will see the distribution of electronic Braille devices where people can download Braille materials from the internet, or we can send it to them on a cartridge. And so over time, we probably won't even have a physical Braille collection in our building. So that's what has really changed since I started is we have more content available to us in electronic, but the physical space that we need to manage that it has decreased and will continue to decrease over time.
That's great, thank you. That's really cool technology about the Braille devices. I had no idea that something like that existed.
And they're the size right now that's being piloted. The size is like not that much bigger than like I have an iPhone X. That's about as big as the device is.
Oh, that's tiny.
It's tiny. You can put it in your pocket. So yes, imagine that. And most of you know what a Braille book looks like. Imagine, and most Braille books are 2 to 3 to 4 or more volumes. I understand from somebody that the entire Braille collection that we have right now could fit on that one device.
Wow.
So,
and how does it output the Braille then?
It has Yeah, it has, it has braille cells, little pins that move up and down
Okay.
to designate what the braille cell represents. And it's like 20 cells. And so people, as the material is being distributed through that, the braille cells will move up and down to designate the letter of the alphabet or the
Okay.
word.
Modern technology for sure.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Surreal. And Tiffany, I know you haven't been with NASA that long, but tell us about some changes there.
Couple years. And I guess, so there's some obvious changes in terms of where I'm working right now, just in the past year. But one of the things that I think a lot about in terms of knowledge management is typically when you're doing knowledge management, you're kind of doing it as a balance between, people, process, and tools. It's kind of the triangle people usually describe. And so I used to think a lot about kind of the different skill sets that are involved in supporting all of those things. One is a pretty strong digital technology skill set, and the other is facilitation. You end up spending a lot of time trying to work with people to understand their tacit knowledge and get that information, find a way to kind of make it available to others. So that has certainly changed in the past year, especially. Is one of the projects I've actually been working on today is a report out of a workshop that we conducted last year at our Armstrong Flight Research Center in California. And I'm going to squiggle my mouse on my other monitors. Hopefully you can see me a little better. And that report is really interesting because it's really kind of looking at what's the history of how we do X-planes, experimental flight. And that project really came out of a 2-day in-person event with about 60 to 65 people that had a pretty comprehensive transcript of a whole lot of information about kind of X-planes. And a lot of that has been able to transfer to online this year, but some things are harder. So that's one of the things that we've kind of noticed is that even when we shift to online events like this one, which is great because I get to come to Minnesota for the day, it's kind of, the challenge is still, it's not quite the same as when you're in person and you kind of maybe have a little bit more sort of comfort with the social side of it as you do when you don't sort of have a mediating kind of experience. And so that's something we've been trying to work on. Our team has been thinking a little bit about how do we accommodate that? Can we share kind of best practices so that when people are also just writ large conducting their work online, are there ways that we can support that? And not all, I should say, not all of the NASA workforce is working from home. We have folks at especially our research centers who are going on site because some laboratory or research work can only be conducted on site. So we have to do that carefully and with a lot of thought to keep people, healthy and safe. But for me, most of my work could be done from home. It's a little easier when other people are at home, so I don't feel like I'm kind of separate from the office, and it's easier to get in touch with folks. But a lot of it is fairly transferable. And so that's been kind of consistent. It's just starting to think about how are others working and how do we better capture that and support them.
Amazing. And I will say that we got 8 inches of snow yesterday and it's 35 degrees here. So be glad you're only visiting virtually.
Right.
Minnesota is not great at the moment.
Stay warm, y'all.
All right. So let's talk about the basics for these jobs. So I'm looking for what are minimum qualifications to do this job, a starting salary or an area of, a range if you have it. So what do people need to get hired in a job like this? And let's start with Drew.
Okay, I looked this up ahead of time because I had no idea, but for an entry-level library and information resource services specialist, or AKA librarian, in the state of Minnesota system, you could expect your starting range, or that position, entry-level position, would range from about $46,000 to $67,000. I'm rounding up there. And what I think is interesting, even when I came on board with the state, more than 14 years ago, they did not require an MLS or an MLIS. They definitely wanted a bachelor's degree and some library experience. I think for the most part, they were expecting you to have a master's degree, but it wasn't a requirement. And I have to think that that is going to only become more and more true, just because the emphasis throughout all kinds of workforces is to break down barriers, diversify the workforce, really look at what someone can bring to the job, what skills they already have, and not so much focusing on credentials. So I think someone who would want to work as a librarian at the state of Minnesota right now, first of all, we do have a hiring freeze because of the pandemic and the recession. And also, I think earlier before this, I would be more excited to say, yes, I think there's going to be a lot of retirements. There could be some openings, but I don't know if that's really the case anymore. I think that we'll just have to wait and see what the state's budget is going to be in the next year or two. So not a whole lot of growth I can talk about right now, but as far as a place to work, I think the salary is pretty decent, especially for entry-level information professionals. You are supported by a union. There's a public pension as well as other really good benefits.
Thank you, Drew. That was amazing. Very comprehensive. And Catherine, I know you're also a state employee. Do you have anything you'd like to add there?
Sure. Right now, the position I'm in is a library program director. That's the title that I have. And the starting salary in there is between basically around $60,000 to $80,000 some odd $1,000 is the range for this position. I don't recall if the position at the time I interviewed required an MLS. It might not have, and I can echo Drew's as well in terms of the requirement for a master's degree in library science. And as it's true with many positions now in the state, that's not necessarily a requirement now. They're looking for your type of work and your experiences, things like that. I would say coming into this type of position to have some maybe business background, supervisory background, management background would be really critical because you do supervise staff. You do have to work with the budget. I had a union background when I came in. I think that's important in this role because I have employees in 3 different unions. And I'm also part of a union, so having some experience there is very helpful. Not that I'm necessarily part of the negotiations teams or things like that, but you have to be aware when you're working with unions and the contracts and things like that. So I think that having that experience as well. So I think the same thing with Drew. We are under a hiring freeze as well. Though we are lucky because our library was designated as a critical 2 operation, essential. So we've been able to keep open, and we are hiring somebody right now because of our classification during the pandemic. So we're a lucky one. I'm very pleased to be able to do that. In fact, I spent the afternoon reviewing job applications. So we will be seeing how that progresses. But yeah, that's kind of what I would say coming into this role. And I know there's some things maybe what I didn't know about when it came on board that it might have been helpful coming into the position. We can talk about that later as well. But yeah, that's kind of where things are and what I would say coming into this position would be important to have.
Great, thank you. Tiffany, tell us how it is with the federal government.
I was frantically Googling while sort of hearing a little bit more about Minnesota. So a few things I actually just looked up, and if there are people looking for work, it does look like there are a few jobs on USA Jobs in Minnesota right now. And then there are also many positions that don't necessarily require you to be in a specific state. So if you haven't used usajobs.gov before and you need help, I am happy to be a resource to anyone, and reach out through Olivia, let me know. It's interesting because I think if you have a librarian background, you will naturally understand how it's structured. And if you don't, it is really, really, really difficult to navigate. I think it's a really, USA Jobs is the vast majority of federal jobs are available that way to look things up if you're looking around for different opportunities. And so what I can tell you, I will start with my own path and then sort of talk through a little bit about what that looks like. So I joined the federal government as something called a Presidential Management Fellow, which is a specific fellowship that's available to anyone with a graduate degree up to, I believe now it's 2 years after you graduate, you can apply. So if you're a very recent grad, it's something that you'd be eligible for. And it's open to literally every graduate degree in the United States. So that's one of the things that makes it kind of interesting too. It's very, very popular with Masters in Public Administration and Masters in Public Policy students. Probably less well known in the library community. I think I was one of 2 or 3 librarians who were in the finalist group my year. And I would really strongly encourage you, if that's something you're interested in, I'm also happy to be a source for that because it's not that many of us in that community. And so the way that works, and the Presidential Management Fellowship has existed since the Carter administration. So it's changed names a little. Sometimes the program ebbs and flows at different points. But the way that it works is that you apply to the program, and then as you get through sort of a specific set of milestones kind of in entry into this fellowship, there's usually some form of kind of assessment and then some form of interview, and then essentially become a finalist. And once you're a finalist in this fellowship, then any federal agency can hire you non-competitively into an accelerated promotion program, which also includes neat things like professional development opportunities and training and details as well. So that kind of the opportunity to work in other agencies too. So I was not really sure what to expect with this fellowship. The year that I applied was when we graduated, so in 2007. And I had focused in library school more on kind of information organization. And I was really interested in specifically kind of questions around how do people organize information using social media. That was starting to become really popular. Twitter had launched, people were getting excited about it, right? Wikipedia was kind of still newish, we've been around for about 5 years. And so that was something I was really, really interested in, and kind of that question of authority, things we're still coping with 15 years later, but that was something I was really curious about. And so I ended up when I applied for the Presidential Management Fellowship, I was, it turned out really well positioned for one job at the US Department of State. They had just brought the same technology that runs Wikipedia online, and they were looking for someone to figure out how to kind of adapt that and help diplomats overseas to adopt it, to start to use that and think about how to collaborate using that technology. And so that was something that as a librarian, I was just sure, like that sounds fun and I'll try it. And I happened to get really lucky and worked with a really nice group of people who were willing to kind of, figure out how to work with me and me to work with them and teach me a lot about the department. And so it just kind of, I was very lucky in a lot of ways. I worked very hard to be that lucky, but I also kind of ended up in this position that was a pretty good fit for a librarian, but a very non-traditional path for librarians. And so in terms of then government kind of job series, I've actually never been in a library job series in the federal government. I've done a number of different types of work with knowledge management and data and collaboration and social information as well. I've typically been in what's called the 0300 job series, which is kind of a blanket group for sort of administrative and management kind of groups. So if you're on USA Jobs and you're looking for 0300s, you probably are equipped to do so. And I actually just looked up the last time I was promoted, kind of what the job description was. And the qualifications are really interesting because I am qualified for it on the plus side, but they have nothing at all to do with librarianship. But I think being a librarian helps so much, just kind of having that background. So, the things that they were looking for were experience utilizing qualitative and quantitative methods, experiencing managing multiple agency programs to coordinate activities and assess impact, and experience in the administration of IT systems and cybersecurity, for instance. So those are all things that I've done and have skills in. And I think a lot of other people likely would as well. It's really helpful for me to kind of have that whole background around reference, organization of information, and systems sort of as well that we think about, I think, in a librarian context. In terms of salary, I started actually as a GS9 in DC, which back in 2007 paid, I think, about $45,000 per year, which is not very much for DC, but it's a really good salary for a starting librarian. And then it was, that fellowship was nice because kind of the next year you got about a $10,000, $15,000 bump, and it kind of went on from there. The past few promotions I've had have been, or jobs that I've kind of shifted into, have been increasingly competitive to be able to kind of get those sorts of jobs. But my federal salary is actually publicly available information, so I can tell you, and sometimes I think it's helpful sometimes to just be clear about salaries when you can. I think last year I made, it was $161,000. So it's a really, I mean, it's a very fair and equitable salary for me and the type of work that I do. I work very hard, I work long hours, but kind of in terms of, you know, for me, in terms of similar types of roles and similar types of jobs that people have elsewhere, I think it's competitive and it feels equitable to me.
Thank you, Tiffany. Thanks for being so honest with us. That was
Sure
really
thing.
great.
I feel like if the data's there, I might as well share it. And it also, I think if it can help other people to advocate who are in similar jobs, that's a good thing.
I completely agree, but sometimes people get strange about money. So
They do.
I appreciate you just addressing it directly.
And while everyone in Minnesota is thinking, holy Toledo, because we've all seen, for example, one of the more recent jobs that was advertised and filled now was the director of Hennepin County Library, which has an $88 million budget. That I don't know what Chad finally negotiated, but that job was not advertised at $160,000. So, and I came from Washington, DC to Minnesota, and I was in the private sector, but even so, I would look at these library jobs in Minnesota and think, is this part-time based on the salary? I'm thinking, really? No. Anyway, so there is a huge difference, obviously. The federal government sets a high bar, which is great. But out here in the hinterlands.
Clarity, I should mention there is locality pay baked into that, so that's not
Sure.
line for a GS15, but it is, I think, yes, it is. It certainly feels, I think, coming from a library background, it is not the salary I was expecting to have 15 years down the career.
Right.
It's been lucky on that front for sure.
Yeah. Well, federal government help, you know, those they do pay well in the library realm. So anyway, it's just like, I just know that the audience is thinking, oh my gosh, and it's everybody is Googling US jobs, USA jobs.
As well they should, right? Okay, let's talk about why you chose this particular route, if you chose it at all, or as opposed to becoming a different kind of librarian. And I know you, Tiffany, mentioned that you were thinking of becoming a children's librarian when you started out, and that you've kind of touched on this a little, but I'm going to let you sort of tackle this first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are a couple different reasons, and actually one was the salary factor, that just in terms of being able to support my family, I needed to kind of find something that would be able to cover that. I think some of the other pieces that maybe kind of came together for me, when I was at Catholic, I did a practicum at the World Wildlife Fund, and what they had a single person library there that, so I got to work with that person, and she had a really interesting kind of approach of I think kind of the way that Drew described it, being really, really collaborative with the researchers at the fund and doing a lot to kind of support that. And one of the challenges that she actually mentioned to me was this point where she would have to kind of balance her salary against the library's needs to put together a budget. And that is a really hard situation to be in. That kind of sense of, you know, shall we buy more journals or pay me more? That sort of thing that I think was a real calculus she had to work on it. And a lot of single person libraries end up in that situation, especially if you're in a a smaller organization or a large organization, kind of that's something you have to figure out at different points or find ways to advocate. So that was a formative kind of experience for me of figuring out, okay, is that something I want to do, and how might I work with other people and kind of that sort of capacity. And then this position opened up, and the other positions I was kind of looking at by that time were more in kind of academic librarianship. I was kind of thinking that was the route I wanted to go. Through library school, I also worked at the Virginia Theological Seminary, which was at their library, which is a really, really wonderful experience. They're a seminary with a couple 100,000 volumes, but really only about 100 students. So they would also get researchers from across the United States, which was, I think, a really kind of interesting sort of experience as well. We did a lot of interlibrary loan. We did a lot of kind of system support for research and reference too. And in that experience, one of the things that I felt was I didn't particularly want to go down one route or another in librarianship. I was really resistant to sort of specific pathways. And for me then, the thing that I really liked about doing knowledge management work, and then later a lot of work around data management and data analytics, and now back more on the knowledge management side, was that sense that I didn't necessarily have to commit to just one sort of specialty, and maybe it's kind of do that specialty and work my way up, or and I also didn't necessarily have to do one thing or the other. What I liked about knowledge management is you kind of lean on all those different assets in kind of a librarianship background. And so that made it much, much more appealing to me. And then the other thing that really mattered to me a lot was the people I worked with over the years. You know, I've had really fantastic colleagues and friends that I've worked with. And I think that's made a huge difference in terms of my experience.
Thank you. Catherine.
Well, I think I mentioned earlier, I have been in a library setting since I was a junior in high school. I worked in the public library in a small town in Iowa, was their library aide, worked in the children's room. I will say I never wanted to be a children's librarian. But I think that's a very special path, and I'm just not made out to be a children's librarian. Will say at Mason City Public Library, when I was the assistant director, I did do story time, and I think that solidified my desire not to be a children's librarian, but nevertheless. So when I was working at Cedar Rapids, I was going to library school at the same time working full time. And I really liked the work in the public library field. I enjoyed the fact that you never really knew what to expect. You never knew who was going to come in through the door. You never knew who was going to call, what kind of questions you were going to get asked. And I liked that variety. But I also knew that I was looking for something different. And when I got my degree, I started to apply for different jobs. I interviewed at John Deere as a corporate library when they were thinking about putting in a corporate library in Des Moines, Iowa. I interviewed for a job in Appleton, Wisconsin for assistant director there. And then I interviewed for Mason City, and that seemed to be a good fit for me. I kind of took advantage of the fact that I'd still be working with the public, and I could still keep my toes in the public service work, but also had some supervisory, and I could learn kind of the ropes of what it would be to be a director, because that's kind of like the natural progression. Once you start getting into administration work, you're likely going to move up if that's something that appeals to you. So the path for me was kind of just gradually moving up in different roles, taking on more administrative responsibilities. But I will tell you that in the job I do now, I don't lose that public service aspect of my job. It's very important to me that I talk on the phones with our users. I still slot out time of the day, and especially now with the pandemic and how we have to provide service right now. I'm answering the phones or making calls to patrons. We're not actually answering the calls live right now, but I'm talking to our patrons. So I still have my toe in the customer service aspect of things, because I don't think I can do my job as an administrator if I don't know what our users are saying or want or express as needs. So, but yeah, my path just, I guess I've always been, I did dabble in cooking school for a year. because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but that was short-lived. And so I've always been just wanting to be in libraries. And I think libraries give you, I don't matters what type of library you have that you're working in, you have opportunities to do a lot of different things in a library. It's not just the book part of it and the reading part of it. There's lots of different roles and activities that you can really take advantage of, a lot of different skill sets coming into a library. So I think there's a little bit misnomer about what it means to be a librarian. I just think for me, I get to wear lots of different hats I think in this job, and I think in a library in general, even in all the roles that I have played over the years or jobs I've taken, I've been able to do lots of different activities, and some I'm better at than others, but I get to flex different muscles, I would say, in this role, and I think libraries give you that.
Wonderful, thank you. Drew?
Hey, so as far as how I landed where I'm at, I started out in news and knew I wanted to maybe move into a different career. I really still love doing research and working with information. So I think I went to library school thinking that I would like to work in a public library or a news library. So out of graduate school, I started working in public libraries and I loved that. But then an opening came available at Iowa State University to be a journalism librarian. And I always loved college towns. And I knew that would afford me opportunity to do a lot of instruction and just a change. So I did that for about 5 years. And then I actually started looking at the Twin Cities because there was a similar role available at the U that I had applied for. And that did not pan out, but I kind of got enthralled with the idea of moving to the Twin Cities. And so I was always on the lookout for what might be available. And so I saw the opportunity at Deed to be the librarian there. I was excited because I would be joining another librarian. It would be a 2-librarian shop. I had been a solo at Iowa State, so I was excited for that. I always had an interest in business research, news research, also labor market and employment trends and things like that. So I got the job and I've been there now a number of years and I really like it. I guess I would say that, like a lot of you mentioned, there's so much variety. There's a chance to really dig in and do research, working on tight deadlines, working with a lot of interesting people doing really cool stuff.
Great, thank you so much. I love hearing everyone's paths. I just think it's so interesting to find out how everyone got to where they went. Everyone's story is so cool. So let's talk about a typical day. What is your day like? And I know that, right now the times are anything but typical, and maybe you don't ever have a typical day, but what is a day in the life for you? And let's start with Catherine.
Well, pre-pandemic, my typical day was I work pretty much a 7:30 to 4:30 shift. Some days are longer, depending on what's happening, but because I have a staff of 7 plus myself, and we do provide materials that have to be mailed out of our facility. So it's all hands on deck. When we come into the office in the morning, everybody helps get books out the door. So my typical day starts with me assisting in our circulation area, getting mail cards printed and inserted into the containers to ship out. So that takes a good hour to 2 hours of my day, depending on what's going on, who's all there. So my typical day starts with that. And then, as I said earlier, I like to keep my toe in what's happening with our patrons. So I will either man the public service desk when we were open. We have a public service desk, so I will sit out there and either help walk-ins or answer the phone or respond to emails. So that's about another hour of my day doing that. And then the rest of the time is either, as I mentioned, putting out fires, because we never know what happens from day to day, but working on our outreach activities, things that when I was going out doing outreach events, working on that, trying to plan for the future. I mentioned a little bit with technology, how it's going to change our service. So I'm trying to plan that. I supervise employees, so I meet one-on-one with my each employee at least a couple of times a month. So I have to do that, and performance reviews, things like that. So that's another part of my job. I'm also part of State Library Services here in Minnesota. So there's meetings and activities around that as well. And we're part of the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, which is part of the Library of Congress. So there are meetings associated with that, either telephone meetings, virtual meetings, close contact with other network libraries. I probably didn't mention, but there's a library like us in every state. So I work with my colleagues on how to improve services, things like that. So yeah, my day, it's kind of broken up, but it's pretty much the same. And even now in the pandemic, that schedule is pretty much the same. I've been going in the office until recently 5 days a week. But recently I've been able to work from home 1 or 2 days a week as well, since we've kind of gotten a routine now with the pandemic and how we're sending out materials and things like that. So that my schedule really hasn't changed too much, but I probably spend a little bit more time pulling materials, getting stuff out the door, because I have fewer people in the building to do that now with the pandemic. Half my staff work from home on any given day. So that's probably the biggest change right now.
Great. Thank you very much. Drew?
Okay, what I would say is that for those in the audience who are considering a government library job, one of the benefits for people like routine is that we really do work a Monday through Friday regular hour schedule. So I'm working 9 until 5:30 or 6 or something like that. And I am a one-person operation now. I'm the only librarian for the agency. And so really when I come in and start my day, my time, I can come into work with the very best of intentions of what I want to accomplish, what do I want to focus on, but my time is really dictated by what my colleagues are working on, what they need, and how soon they need it. So I'll start my day just looking through requests and prioritizing requests, looking through emails, checking the news, and I'm on Twitter, I'm on different news alerts. So during downtimes, I'm compiling different what I call deed library alerts, which are weekly email newsletters I send out to different work groups throughout the week. So I'm working on that. I am responding to requests for articles, for research, doing interlibrary loan. I manage our electronic resources, so there's always a renewal that I seem to be working on, or evaluating a new resource we might want to pursue. So I, like the special librarians, I think people are drawn to working in government libraries because you get to do all the different roles in a library, whether it's research or marketing or cataloging or electronic resource management. You just get to dabble in all different areas in that regard.
So Drew, now with the pandemic and the importance of deed, as an agency during the pandemic, do you see that your workload has increased a lot? More requests from your colleagues or from the commissioner's office or whatever?
It's always really busy, but in regards to the pandemic, my colleagues were super busy with unemployment insurance. super busy supporting businesses, especially small businesses, getting them relief and loans. And then also, we also provide services to people recently laid off as far as outreach and support in those ways. So I guess how it directly impacted me is I am sending out those weekly newsletters. And so what the information I was sharing with my colleagues really ramped up, especially for those work groups wanting to know about layoffs, wanting to know how the small business community was faring in the state, and also compiling news about just the general economy and how different Minnesota businesses were pivoting to respond to COVID. I guess I was busy, but in a different way, and it was mostly tracking news and developments and sharing it with different work groups.
Great. And before I let Tiffany answer this question, I will say I have a Q&A question for you, Drew. The question is, do you manage your own budget for the library, for DEED?
That's a great question. I do not directly manage the budget. The library falls under the analysis and evaluation unit. So the director of that unit manages the budget. So that's a bit of a relief. And how we kind of operate as a library, we don't have one library budget that we have to adhere to throughout the year. If we want something, we tap the user group that needs it, and then they provide the money to support it. So it's a lot of working with colleagues as far as what they want, what they're willing to pay, what we can get the information for, and then having them pay for it. So it's a lot of reaching out, trying to beg for money and that sort of thing.
Great, thank you so much. And Tiffany, tell us about a typical day for you.
So they vary a lot, just like everyone else. Excuse me. So I'm looking at kind of a calendar in the other window right now, and the calendar, unfortunately, is actually pretty typical. I usually have about 50 hours of meetings per week. And then kind of the work can happen in that, or it happens before it or after. In terms of the role that I do, though, the meetings vary a lot. And so that at least keeps it interesting and fun. And I actually enjoy a meeting. So at least the ones where we're getting something done and something useful is happening as a result. So that part is pretty good. I think, as with most people who are kind of working from home, especially in the past 6 months, I think you find meetings just start propagating more and more. I think I was usually at around 30 to 35 hours before pandemic, and it just cropped up a little bit as things have gone on. And on the plus side, I'm in a position where I have authority over my calendar. So if there's something that needs to take priority, I can kind of adjust a lot of things. In terms of kind of overall typical day, it does vary a lot. So I have, and maybe I should have described this at the beginning, actually exactly what NASA aeronautics research is, because not a lot of people are familiar. Typically when people think about NASA, you think about space. The first A in NASA, however, is aeronautics. What aeronautics means to NASA, and it's a smaller portion of the budget at this point, but it's really the thing that NASA came from, was the National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, which was founded in Washington in the early 1900s, and initially at the Langley Memorial Laboratory which is now the Langley Research Center in Virginia, in Hampton, Virginia. That's the one that a lot of people think of from Hidden Figures. It looks a lot like that if you've seen that movie. So aeronautics continues to be something that NASA explores. Although we have commercial flight, although we have a really robust aviation industry, which has had some challenges in the past year, there's still a huge amount of research that NASA does around aeronautics, in addition to the great amount of research that NASA does for space and as well as our flight operations. So what the aeronautics research portfolio looks like, which is typically at our research centers, Ames and Armstrong in California, Glenn in Ohio, Langley in Virginia, is conduct kind of additional research conduct research that relates to how especially US citizens can benefit from flight. So there's a wide range of things that have to do with that. There's something that we call advanced air mobility, which I like to kind of shortcut as flying cars. So it's kind of this idea of using autonomy to help people travel back and forth in different places. And initially, one of the things that's kind of interesting is people referred to that as urban air mobility because they thought a lot about commuting problems in that area. It became advanced air mobility when they realized there are tons of applications in rural spaces as well. You can use these things for ambulances, for instance, and other types of things for getting people back and forth across different short distances. So we have that type of work. We've been doing some really interesting work on commercial supersonics that has to do with kind of researching, are there ways to design aircraft so that there's less of a sonic boom when you fly over land? And so we have a really neat experimental plane on that front that's currently in development to start to look at, can you kind of change the way that science works? Or not change the science exactly, but better kind of design aircraft that work on that. And we also have another large set of research around both electric propulsion, so as to kind of facilitate the transition away from fuel, as well as a set of work around safety and kind of that set of systems that kind of go into the aviation, the air traffic management kind of world. So my job really is to connect all of that. I should have been clear about that at the beginning. And then I also manage our IT. So that's a fairly large budget that kind of goes into IT for NASA writ large, as you might imagine. So I have things that are related to kind of an OCIO type responsibility in relation to IT management for aeronautics research. That's a lot of meetings on my calendar. I have a lot of things that kind of have to do with how do we learn from what we've done? How do we capture that? And how do we facilitate that information sharing back and forth? And especially actually at this time of year, every year, all of the groups that do that aeronautics research, both especially at those 4 research centers, but also at universities across the country. And I believe there's at least one in Minnesota, there might be 2. They actually report on their performance in conducting that research. So my job is to capture that and facilitate kind of how do we evaluate that so that we can plan for future aeronautics research activities. So it's really kind of looking at how have we done, where are the challenges, where are other things that we need to do to partner better with industry. So that activity, the performance that happens every year, that's about 2 weeks of 8 to 10 hour meetings per day in terms of people kind of coming in, presenting on their research, the scientists and research teams really showing kind of tremendous, interesting things about kind of what they've gathered and how they might be able to work together. And so my job there is to pay attention, think about kind of how that relates and what other people might learn from that, and also how our mission can really think about connecting that and using that performance information to inform our own agency as well as the public, and sort of help American citizens and other researchers. So there are a lot of different small activities that go into that. And so it means though that I do spend a lot of time in meetings, and I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about how do we connect that information, whether through intranets, through reports, through other sorts of network activities across the agency.
Fabulous. Then I'm actually going to jump ahead to a question, which is there a specialized skill set that is needed for your job outside of what we consider typical library skills? And if so, did you have this before getting your job, or did you learn on the job? And are there special degrees or licenses or things that are needed to do this job? And I'm jumping to this question because of Tiffany's amazing last answer, which explains so much about aeronautics, but I feel like you weren't an expert in aeronautics before you started this job. So could you maybe tackle this for us?
Yeah, actually, I'd be happy to. For my job, no, I do not have a background in aeronautics. And I regularly bring in people who do, and that's a big part of my job is kind of the ability to facilitate working very closely with people who are experts so that I can learn from them and so that I can focus on my own area of expertise, which is managing that information. So in terms of skill sets, there are knowledge management certifications and skill sets that exist. For the most part, I have, at least in my experience, that's all taught in library school if you're kind of thinking of it in terms of knowledge management. So if you're comfortable with the idea of not applying it kind of in this space, but instead applying it in this space, you've got it from my perspective. However, there are certifications that exist. And so that's something that if it's of interest, it certainly could be helpful and it may kind of help to amplify that skill. There are other additional organizations that also exist, but professional associations in the library field do have, there's a knowledge management division for the Special Library Association, for instance. There's knowledge management that's tied to ASIST and other sorts of groups that also are kind of, those different areas do exist and are kind of there to help support that. On the IT side of my job, that's a whole pile of other skills that are kind of usually running parallel, although I think many, many systems librarians have similar skills too. So I think typically if you're kind of going in the kind of systems route, you'd be very comfortable in the conversation about cybersecurity. The kind of question about cybersecurity at scale might be a little bit different, but you'd certainly be able to kind of understand it and follow along with the conversation and contribute. I think which is part of the job. And so the other thing I guess I would say is, so I worked at the State Department for 11 years and I really, really enjoyed my experience. I did a really wide range of things. On average, most of the time that I worked there, I was working usually at minimum 12-hour days. So when I transferred to NASA, the sort of standard was a little different, at least in the office, that most people at least appeared to kind of check out at sort of a typical kind of 9 to 10 hour day for the most part at headquarters. And people might work from home or they might do some things on the weekends here or there, but typically at least it was kind of that sort of structure. And all of a sudden I kind of realized I had all this extra time on my hands, which seems very odd to, I know if you were not in that situation, but I think at least, you know, kind of doing diplomacy is probably a little bit like med school or other things that you kind of just end up with these really, really long days and people think it's normal and then you realize it's not when you leave it. So I actually decided to get my PhD part-time. So I've been working on that and that has actually been really helpful in supporting the NASA work because I've been focused on science and technology studies. So thinking a lot about social construction of knowledge as it relates to especially science and technology, which is just a really nice fit. So I've been doing that on my own. It's been my hobby, but it's a hobby I enjoy. And it's definitely very, very closely related and has been a helpful skill set. So I think that the really long way around to that answer is in terms of aeronautics, I think what I found is probably those folks who might have a library background and a subject matter specific area of expertise, it might be an easier transition. But I think also once you've done a lot of that type of work, you start to figure out kind of how to suss out the architecture so that you're kind of better equipped to work no matter the specific subject. And then kind of start to flesh in the architectures once you're there and you're really starting to work more closely with the human beings involved.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Drew?
As far as specific skill sets that were helpful in the job at DEED, I was brought in at a time when DEED had just undergone a merging. 3 different state agencies were brought together to become what is now DEED. And so I was given the task of really marketing the library to the new whole agency and making sure it was used by everyone in the agency. So in that case, I brought a background in marketing and communications that was helpful. Having knowledge of business research was also helpful. You know, I took business reference in library school and I covered business as a newspaper reporter and had some background in like state and city government. So that was helpful. And I think also just having, having a news background where you're used to working on tight deadlines, you have some sense of news judgment can be very helpful when I'm creating and sending out these newsletters to different work groups, and also researching, like often I'm asked to come up with background information on a company before the governor goes to visit or our commissioner goes to visit, or maybe it's to craft a speech addressing a business topic. So really being able to work under some sort of tight deadlines to find out all the information you can, making sure it's as accurate as possible. That all came in handy as well. I also work on different business proposals when Deed is trying to attract a business to locate in Minnesota or perhaps expand in Minnesota. We want to try to find out all we can as far as what other states are competing with Minnesota, trying to better understand what the company really wants in a new location, or what they're planning to do in the future. So really being able to dig and piece together kind of the story is helpful as well. And I think you're on mute, Olivia. I didn't get that.
I said, Catherine, I'm guessing you didn't come in as an expert in Braille devices, so.
No, and I'm still not an expert in Braille by any stretch. That was kind of I was worried about that would be a factor in me getting the job if I had to know Braille. It was preferred, but 20 some odd years later, I can read Braille if I have an alphabet card in front of me that helps me decipher the Braille code. So that's not a requirement for the job. I think it would be helpful, but I think one of the things, and that I just thought of as I was thinking of hearing Drew and Tiffany's responses, the one thing I really didn't know a lot about coming into the job, and considering that our service is to provide material in an accessible format, that's our main job. I didn't know a lot about accessibility in other areas of my job, in terms of web design, in terms of, especially in that area, or even in communication, how to interact with somebody who's blind or has other disabilities. Knowing those things, that's not taught in library school. So I knew nothing about that, but the whole area around accessibility is, well, definitely something that is extremely important and very much so in our. But I think the state of Minnesota, and I think other states and other organizations have really taken on the whole role of what accessibility means. And so I think that's something that I'm not as familiar with what's going on in library school, but I think that would be a very important component of teaching and learning about in library school. The other thing that I didn't come with really I came with a lot of a library experience coming into my role, but not a lot of supervisory experience. And I don't think, at least at the time I took it, supervisory wasn't not a lot in library school. Some management class, there was kind of touched upon in one of the management books that I had in school. So I'm very lucky that in my job, it's encouraged for professional development, to take additional classes, to learn these things. That's very important. But if you're going to be in any, I don't think it really matters whether you're a manager or you have coworkers. I think it's important to know how to do team building, how to interact with people of all different backgrounds. And I think that's something I had to learn, and I should say still learning, because it's not something that you just learn and you're done with. You should always try to expand. And because even now with the technology, and we're doing these Teams or these Zoom meetings, it's a whole different way of interacting with people. And I'm still learning that and what it means to be engaged in this type of environment. So I think that's part, but I would say coming into this role, I knew very little about what it meant to have an accessible service, formats, communication. And so that, and I have enjoyed learning about that. And so I think that, and I would really encourage, I hope in library schools that's some of that is being taught or should be considered as an important component of your in a library background or education.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, let's go with what is the best thing about your job, and also what is the worst thing about your job? And Drew, I'll let you tackle that one first.
Okay, the best part I would say is just really there's just such variety with the projects and the questions I get to work on. The worst part of the job, I would say the worst part, or the most frustrating part of the profession in general, I think, is just having to justify libraries, librarians, explain what we do, why we're important, why we're relevant. And I think that's true for librarians in all industries and all organizations, but I think that's kind of just that it just takes a lot of bandwidth to just always having to, do the rallying call for librarianship. I always kind of think like IT professionals, they really don't have to worry. People don't question what they do. They don't question their value. It's just a given that they are needed. But I can't say that that is necessarily true for librarians, information professionals, especially those working in a non-traditional setting outside of public libraries, academic libraries.
I concur, and that is not the first time we have heard that answer, Drew.
Sure.
So, Catherine, best and worst.
I would say the best part is the feedback we get either from our patrons or their family members. And it's been more relevant in the past 6 to 8 months, and because many families who have people who use our service, they're either in care facilities, nursing homes, they cannot go visit them. So having our service available to them, knowing that we are still sending out materials and books has been extremely gratifying to me, and I can't tell you that how many times I've cried or tears come to my eyes when some family member either shares over the phone or in an email or a letter just how important this service is to us. So we constantly hear that, and I don't take that for granted at all. The other thing, echoing Drew's comments too about the variety of the work I do, I think I've repeated throughout this talk, is that I wear different hats every day. When I started here, I had to learn about compact shelving. I knew nothing about compact shelving. So I had to learn what that meant, and what different steel widths and weight and movable versus electronic and tracks. And I've dumped a lot of it from my brain over the years, but I didn't really know what that all was about. So I like the fact that I can learn something and it helps inform me later on. I would say maybe not the best thing of the job is that we could do more than what we're doing. And again, Drew said we're constantly having to justify sometimes what we do and why we do it. Why can't somebody go to the public library and get a book? Why do we need to exist? And I have said for years, I would rather be out of a job if I could guarantee that whatever somebody needed in the format they needed, when they needed, was there. And that's not possible right now. I would gladly give up my job if I can guarantee if somebody called up and said, I need in Braille something, and we could get it to them in a reasonable amount of time. Well, we can't guarantee that right now. So that's frustrating to me, is that we could do more. There's with either more staff or more money or more resources, we could always do more. But given where we're at right now, and we're still providing service, and hearing how much impact our service has on our end user and our patrons and their family, I guess I'll stick with having a job right now and doing what I'm doing. But I hope someday to say that this particular type of work isn't needed. But we're a long way off from having that be a reality.
which is a shame, but thank you so much,
Yeah.
Catherine. Tiffany?
Those are such great answers. I feel like I'm learning so much from this panel. And I think the thing that I actually appreciate most about my job is the fact that I get to learn a lot of things. That there are all these topics I know very little about, and then I'll hear a presentation on some particular area of science or research or something else and start to connect it with something else. That to me is really exciting and interesting, and I enjoy that. I also wanted to second Catherine's earlier point about leadership and management skills being really critical. That was something I hadn't thought of, and then when you said it, I said, oh yes, that's incredibly important. And that's actually a part of my job I really enjoy as the leadership and management. It's challenging, but it also is, I work with a group of, we have 9 interns right now, and they're really fun to work with because they're so excited about kind of being able to contribute and participate and be involved. And then I also work with some people who have been with the government for many, many, many years, and in some cases longer than me. And those people also have a lot to kind of offer, and are able to kind of look for ways to kind of share the thing that they remember sometimes from 10 or 20 years ago that can really help a problem now. And that's something that I also really, really enjoy working with. So kind of that sense of being able to connect with other people and use that for the benefit of all is something that I find really powerful. And I think also kind of ties back to that librarian route. The thing that maybe I like a little less about doing knowledge management is actually that I miss being at the very front end sometimes of service to especially the American public. That's something that NASA obviously is doing a lot for the United States. And certainly in terms of the work that we do on the aeronautics research side, we're very, very closely tied to the American economy and American industry. The work that I do, I don't as much kind of interact with the public. I don't as much answer kind of direct public challenges and problems. I tend to be kind of one degree of abstraction from that. And that's something I kind of miss from doing other types of work. So it's something that I also really appreciate when I see other people doing it. Every once in a while, I'll kind of get the chance to do it again for different purposes. We'll do public outreach events and or we'll teach kids about specific things related to science. When I was at the State Department, I actually got to occasionally do kind of public diplomacy outreach. So I did some work teaching social media in East Jerusalem. And that was really, really neat and very invigorating and exciting. And it's not really my day job for the most part. So when I get those opportunities, I really enjoy it. And I think that's one of the things I kind of miss about being more kind of one degree of meta kind of away from public service. Although I very, very much believe in the public service that we are doing.
Thank you. And actually, Tiffany, we have a question, a Q&A for you. They want to know, does working in the government library require a background check or a security clearance? And do you have an FBI file?
That question. I don't know. I haven't asked. It depends a lot. Most federal government positions require a public trust background check. Actually, I don't know if it's most. There is a background check organization that can tell you. I have gone through background checks. It was not traumatizing. So it's an additional responsibility in terms of information that you might handle that's more sensitive. And so being aware of that in any type of position, being comfortable with that is something that's helpful. I think for most people, typically in this profession, it's in library and information science, you realize you have to handle sensitive information. You just kind of tuck it into a different container in your brain when you're dealing with it. And then you kind of handle it appropriately from there. So I also think probably there are background checks required for other kind of state agencies as well and other types of work. So I think some degree of it, it's usually, it's not too painful when you have to do it. It's just having a lot of documents to be able to look up and former addresses and things like that.
And a follow-up question, which is for everyone, and I'm going to let you handle it first, Tiffany, is for all of you, are your jobs in any way dependent upon who is in office? Does an elected official get to decide if you keep your job when the administration changes parties?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, sure. So no, not for me thus far in my career. I'm in the civil service, so up to the GS 15 level where I'm at, you typically have sort of typical kind of civil service protections when, in terms of kind of how that type of work, in terms of any types of positions you might be in if an administration changes. In terms of changes to jobs, I haven't experienced it. There are many more politically appointed positions at the State Department than there are at NASA. So it was something where you would notice a lot more comings and goings in administration changes, or even sometimes when an administration didn't change. I worked for Secretary Clinton and Secretary Kerry, and there were still a number of different kind of positions that changed when secretaries of state changed at the State Department. So you still sort of saw it even in the same administration. So in terms of most GS positions, though, would not be necessarily directly affected by that. It may be that sort of the specifics around your work could change depending on administration priorities, but that's sort of to be expected in working in the federal government. So it's really pretty hopefully even keel for most folks. And I think the other thing, I guess I would say, and maybe it kind of also ties to the background check question, is that NASA employees and all federal service and public service employees are bound by something called the Hatch Act, which means that we don't comment kind of on elections. We don't show favoritism towards one party or another. So that's especially important at this time of year. And so that's just something that we kind of keep in mind, is that we don't necessarily want to look as if we're endorsing one particular party or another one. All of that being said, administrations typically don't necessarily affect the general service type of schedule or those positions.
Good to know. Thank you. And Catherine?
Well, I've been in the job for 20 years, so I have seen lots of different assistant commissioners through education, a few bosses. So no, at this point, my job is not dependent on who is administration. Though, I mean, over time, and even before my time, where we might be located in a particular agency has been discussed about. So there were talks long time ago about maybe moving us out of where we're at in Minnesota, moving us up to the Twin Cities, or possibly merging with another agency or things like that. But generally, no, my position has been pretty stable, regardless of who might be the commissioner or where we might be in the state government structure.
Thank you. And Drew?
Yeah, I would just add on to what Tiffany and Catherine mentioned, what people may not realize, because I certainly didn't realize, but in government, I think there's the notion that it's very stable, but what you might not realize is with every new governor, the governor, he or she can appoint all new commissioners and does appoint all new agency heads. And then those commissioners for the agencies then really assemble their own senior leadership team. And after that takes place, then the organizational structure of the agency often changes. So like Catherine mentioned, you kind of can shuffle around within the agency under different work groups, other divisions. But I think, because I never worked in an organization that was represented by a union, and now that I'm working in government, I really can see the value of being represented in my case by the MAPE, which is the Minnesota Association of Professional Employees, because they really are there to support you and stand up for you if you are, you know, I guess if your job is threatened in some certain way. I have to think that if a new governor came in and appointed a new commissioner with a new senior leadership team, if they questioned the value of a library, maybe they'd want to do something like have an innovation lab instead of a library. I mean, I think that could hold sway as far as my position. What do you think, Catherine? Has that come up before within other libraries?
Well, it has within the Department of Education. There's been talk about the state library services, and there were at one point in time there was a really robust state library agency within the Department of Education. And new administration came in, and budget cuts were made, and a lot of the services with that state library services offered were cut and really haven't really been reconstituted. But our program really has been pretty stable since then. I used to have twice as many staff work for me than I do now. So that has changed. But so yeah, I mean, it could easily happen within our agency, and to determine whether our program is necessary, or could somebody else in the state government do our services. And that has been talked about over the years. But I think we're lucky in the sense that we provide a direct service to people here in Minnesota. And I think that's been important to have the advocacy there within the people that use our service. We also have an advisory group that helps support and provide advice on our program. So I think that I'm not saying it could never happen, but I think it would be problematic possibly to do that, or it would really, I think the people that use our service would really be upset. And you definitely do not want to have people who have a disability to be out there on the governor's steps or administration steps being, upset about what an agency may or may not do. So I think but I will never say never, because it could happen. But so far we've been pretty lucky to keep our program and what we provide for service. I guess the biggest impact I've seen over the 20 years is just a reduction in the staff. So we have to do a lot more with fewer people. But overall, as I mentioned, the technology component of us has helped maintain the level of service that we are doing.
Wonderful. Let's talk about professional organizations. I know that there are professional organizations for various levels of your jobs. Do you belong to them? What are they? Do you belong to them? And what benefit do you think that this provides to your work, or not if you don't belong to any? So let's go with Drew.
Okay, so I am a member of SLA and the Minnesota chapter. Also, what might be of interest to people interested in government libraries is I am active in CALCO, which stands for the Capital Area Library Consortium. So we are a group of mostly state government librarians, information professionals that meet physically or through Zoom every other month. And then we oftentimes communicate with each other with questions and information needs and things like that. And then I also am somewhat involved in the Minnesota Library Association. But I think the real value for me is as a solo librarian, it can be rather lonely. So I find that there's a tremendous value of having a network of other librarians, information professionals that you can, reach out to, connect with, work on projects, and all of the good things that come with that.
Great, Drew. That was like an advertisement for why you should join an organization, I feel like.
Yeah,
I wholeheartedly concur. Tiffany.
Yeah, kind of what Drew said, but just from a slightly different angle. What I'm also a member of SLA. I had actually been very, very much involved in SLA in library school, and I kind of let it lapse for a while. When I started kind of down one particular career path, and I was doing a lot more with the data management, data analytics, I was starting to feel like I didn't really belong, and I wasn't quite sure. And then I kind of, when I picked up the knowledge management role at NASA a couple of years ago, I felt like, oh, I kind of need a refresher. And I miss the network a lot. And so that was something that for me was helpful. And I still feel like I'm trying to kind of rebuild some of that network that I had missed a little bit when I was doing other things. But it's nice because I think when you're a librarian, librarians are always there for you. They leave the light on, and that's nice. I'm also a member of ACEST, which I look to more kind of for the research side, and I'm a little less active in. And then I also am a member of, there's something called 4S that's more on the social studies of science kind of side. So it's more specific to that discipline. And I do find it really valuable to be able to both have a place to find kind of other people who are interested in the same kind of topics. And I think the other thing when I kind of rejoined this past couple of years was that sense that it's probably time for me to start giving back, which, you know, I hadn't thought of initially. I think initially I was thinking of it more as kind of the network for my own benefit. And, you know, I'm probably at a point where I should actually be helping others. So here I am for you if it's just Thanks,
someone will take you up on that, Tiffany. And Catherine.
The program I'm part of, as I think I mentioned earlier, there's a library like us in every state. And the network, when I first came on board, having that network of libraries available to me, library directors, we have our own listserv that we communicate on. And then the National Library Service divides up the US into 4, I would say, quadrants. And so that there are different areas of the country that are divided. So like there's a North region, South region, West, and Midlands. And those just kind of make up certain states. And we have our own organization that we, as part of the location here, we have meetings, conferences every other year as this small entity, or we may join with another region to have meetings. And then nationally, there are conferences that occur every other year at a national level. And I was, you know, not having a lot of experience in this type of work. I relied on those networks and I relied on those folks that could help me learn about the program. Everybody was so generous. I got, you know, people reached out to me. And also as part of this program, there is a network consultant that works for the Library of Congress, National Library Service. And they're there to help you be the go-between between us and the National Library Service. So having that resource as well is really important to our program. And I really appreciate having at my disposal an email or a phone number or somebody where I can just call up and talk to either one-on-one with somebody or as part of small groups. So yeah, I encourage, take advantage of whatever organization or structure that's available within the type of service you're part of or library you're part of. As Drew mentioned, the Minnesota Library Association, things like that. So I think those are all very important.
Wonderful. And the next question I think kind of dovetails with that nicely, which is, are there opportunities for continued training and professional development for your job, and what kinds of trainings are offered? And I know a lot of that can come from organizations. So let's stick with you, Catherine. You were talking about this a little bit.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned, we have meetings, annual conferences or biannual conferences. At the national level, they're every other year. We were to have one this year in, I think, May. Of course, that did not happen, and it has yet to happen. It will probably be virtual. So there's training opportunities within there. As part of the network, we are encouraged to put on presentations, either as a single library or as joined as other libraries, to put on presentations about the service or what we're doing in our own library as well. There are, of course, within the state of Minnesota, there's training opportunities for the job I'm in terms of for professional development or through state library services, chances there as well. There are, let's see, I think that's probably about it. I'm also a lifelong learner, so I just make it an effort to learn about things, either whether they're directly related to my job or just interest, because I think Drew mentioned having to keep track of the news and what's going on there. It's important for the role I'm in to kind of keep track of what's happening and how it might affect our services in some way. So always try to take classes regardless of where they fit in my job in some ways. So yeah.
Terrific. Drew.
Yeah, one professional development opportunity that the state offers that I have yet to take advantage of is they offer a statewide leadership institute that goes on, I believe, for a year to develop emerging leaders. And that's something that I would love to do at some time. What is really challenging, especially for a solo librarian, is to just kind of carve out the time to do things like that. That's why I think it's so wonderful to go out of town and go to the SLA annual conference or the MLA annual conference. There's really some value to you leave your workplace, you go out of town, you don't check email, so you can focus on learning opportunities and networking and visiting with vendors. I have attended MLA virtually, SLA virtually just this past month, and it is not the same experience because you're still distracted by your colleagues and your work. And I think there's really something to be said to just unplugging, going somewhere so you can focus on your own professional development and you're not distracted by your employer and workplace.
I agree with that. I was actually disappointed that not to be able to go to Duluth this year for MLA. That's always such a nice area to go and visit. So,
Well, and I felt that I thought the content that was offered through MLA and all the sessions that I attended was great, but it was always sort of anticlimactic at the end of the day because I didn't see Drew to say, you know, whatever, or you don't, those people you only see once a year, you know, the librarians from UMD or wherever. So, okay, it's over. You don't get to go to dinner or just chat in the hallways. So, I mean, I thought the content was great, but I really agree with Drew and Olivia. You miss so much when it's completely virtual. So it's tough.
And Tiffany, tell us about organizations that you belong to. No, I'm sorry, we're on a different question now.
Training.
My fault. Tell us about professional development training.
Well, it's definitely related. But yeah, very, very similar experience and attempting to attend virtual conferences and trying to learn that way. It's tricky. And I think occasionally I've been over leaning on the fact that a lot of those will be available afterwards. They'll say, you can check out the recorded version 3 months down the road or whatever, but it doesn't feel the same. And so I'll say, oh, I'm just too busy today. And then kind of need to find time to go look for it later. And I worry that I never will. So I think that, but I do think that kind of looking out for that is really important, especially kind of with the background that we have, I think to be able to find other people that do similar work. And I think in some ways I'm kind of in a similar boat to Drew, that it's sort of a single person library kind of operation with a number of different teams that I'm also working with. But I think kind of that sense of professional development, it's not quite as intuitive. I think it's kind of, you have to seek it out and figure out what's the thing that people are talking about in the profession that I should be aware of. And also kind of start to think about how does it relate. So very much concur on that. I could also mention though, we do actually at NASA offer a lot of virtual training that's open to the public. Or at least professional development. We have something called the Virtual PM Challenge, which is a really, really neat series of interviews with people who have been project managers or other senior leaders at NASA. And so they do these, they ask amazing questions, much like Olivia is. And they also really have these just fascinating stories of kind of what does it mean to lead really challenging teams? How do you work through problems? How do you do, kind of measurement and evaluation? What about safety and risk? Lots of things that I think we all cope with no matter your job that a lot of different people can learn from. So that's something that we use at NASA, but we also do actually make available to the public. And there's also a great podcast called Small Steps, Giant Leaps. That's a kind of neat set of interviews with people that have done different management activities that I personally, without a strong background in engineering, have learned a lot from, just kind of in terms of the mindset. And that for me has been really helpful too.
Thank you for those amazing resources. I have written those down, and I will include those in the email that I send out to all the attendees so that they can have that information as well. All right. So let us talk about the future for your jobs. I know you guys have mentioned this in various other answers to other questions, but what does the future look like for your job? Are you concerned about that future? Are you concerned that you still need to advocate, or are you pretty confident that you're going to go forward? And let's start with Drew this time.
You know, I think the pandemic has thrown so many things up in the air. How we work, where we work, what's going to be important in work. There's so much that will be worked out, I think, in the next couple of years. I always thought an important part of my job was having a physical space to not just promote the library, but, as a role of a librarian, having a space for people to come and meet and share information. Now it sounds like in state government, we probably won't even be coming back to our work sites until July 2021. And even then, I think a lot of people are going to do a hybrid model where maybe they're just on site a few days out of the week. We're mainly working from home. So I question the role of having a physical space moving forward. I question really the value of an MLS, MLIS. I feel like in libraries, even library directors nowadays don't necessarily have to have an MLS or MLIS to be a director. I see public libraries hiring more like social workers or people with the aptitude and the promise of becoming a good library staff who are not necessarily professional librarians. I see a lot in the job market right now where there's different technical skills for information professionals that maybe other professionals could do, that I guess jobs that we all could do, we are doing, but maybe may not be called librarians or require librarianship as the background. So I just think that as if we've ever done this, we can't rest on our laurels. We really have to stay awake, observant as to being able to anticipate what are the information needs within our organizations and how we can provide those services and meet those needs. So I think the next few years will be very interesting.
I agree. Thank you. Tiffany?
Yeah, I've had sort of the same question at different points over the years about the value of the Master's Library Science. And I think where I'm at now from my experience is this sense that when I reflect on the past 15 years or so, I think to myself, what I pictured as the outcome of that degree is very different from the reality that I've had as an outcome of that degree. And I would not have had the same opportunities without that degree. And so to me, it's kind of that sense of the same thing you sort of hear of where people tend to strive for the jobs that they see. And I think that tends to be kind of what draws so many people to librarianship. And I think maybe thinking of the MLS or MLIS less as a degree that speaks directly to a career in librarianship, there may be other ways of framing it for people to show kind of the value of how it applies elsewhere. And that's something I personally care a lot about from my own experience, but I think it also may help some people that go through an MLIS program and then maybe are frustrated because it's hard to find a library job with feeling really comfortable with that outcome. That I think that's something that can be, when you think, oh, we're going to have so many opportunities and you realize, it's a little harder to kind of figure that out. There's still lots and lots of other opportunities that might be available as a result of higher education that are still worthwhile. And so I think that's something that, at least in terms of when I think about the future, kind of I've had really fantastic experiences with other people, working closely with other people or supervising people with an MLS or MLIS background, and that's worked really well. And oftentimes there's sort of at least a couple conversations of me kind of persuading them that this job is really fun. And it's, even though it's not quite what we pictured. And I think, you know, that's just something that I think happens in terms of kind of what you think about. In terms of my own future, I think there's a lot of, I'm really looking forward to seeing kind of what happens. You know, I think a lot of us, 2020 has been a really hard year. And so I think kind of that sense of how we work together across our different communities to find ways to kind of hopefully move into 2021, you know, focused on, you know, our safety and our wellness and our communities. I think that can make a lot of things look very different. And I think in terms of my role, I'm hoping to be able to be a part of that for both kind of my work and you know, my home and my family too.
Wonderful. And Anne pointed out, and I totally agree, that your question or your comments about the MLIS really kind of the point of this entire series that we're doing, you know, in that opening it up a little and kind of demystifying the role of the librarian and letting people see that this is, you know, this is people from all walks of life who have so much background and knowledge in a lot of different areas. And it's not just a public librarian who's recommending a book to you the way a lot of people have pictured in their heads. So really well said, Tiffany. Thank you. And Catherine.
Yeah, I have to echo everything Drew and Tiffany have said too, in terms of the master's degree in library science. As for the future, I alluded to the fact earlier that when I started, we had a whole bunch of different formats and everything was physical. You know, it was definitely something where you had to kind of touch and pick up and ship it out the door. And that's changed, and that's going to continue to change. And I anticipate in the next 3 to 5 years, we may be delivering our materials wirelessly to folks, and we're not even going to have the type of service we have now in the future. So I think having a different set of skills to handle that type of service is going to be extremely important. Our management of the collection is going to really be different, and it's starting to be different now. I think the program will exist, but we won't need the 20,000 square foot building we're in right now at some point in time, because we're not going to have couple 100,000 audiobooks sitting on the shelf waiting for somebody to request it. We're just not going to need that. And as I mentioned, it will definitely change in terms of Braille and other formats down the road. So I think the future, we're going to be needed. And I've already said earlier that if I'd be happy not to have the need for this type of service. But I just think having somebody and having people not just in the role I'm in, but other staff members coming in with kind of not just the library experience, having either a business background, a humanities background. Just when I'm looking for people, I'm looking for lots of different aspects of, and encourage people to bring to the job just a desire to learn and a desire to keep the skills going. I think that's really, really important. And that you, right now, in this type of environment that we're in, to be able to pivot, because you never know what your day is going to be like. I mean, who knew that at the end of March, I'd be sending everybody home with a laptop and a VPN connection, which nobody knew, and have people really adjust to that, and to have people who are willing to adjust to that. And so I think that the future is going to be, continue to be able to make those adjustments. Because I think, as Drew mentioned, we're not going to be back in the office. The majority of us are not going to be back in the office anytime soon. And it won't be the same even after that. We've gotten comfortable in some cases to be working from home, and like the flexibility of that. Our service still needs, there's still a in the office component, because we can't ship our books out from somebody's home. But I do see that that's going to change going down the road, and having having the skill set to make those adjustments and to pivot when necessary is going to be really, really critical in having a successful service.
Wonderful. I actually had a note here to myself to remind Drew to plug the SLA Minnesota event, and you just put it in the chat. So take a brief moment, if you would, Drew, and just tell everyone what that is.
Okay, thank you, Olivia. I thought it really tied along well with the whole pursuing professional development and the changing role of librarians, because I monitor job openings and I try to share those job leads with SLA Minnesota. And I have been seeing over and over again the real demand for technical skills, often skills like data visualization and analysis and project management. So I always wanted to offer a program where people could learn about what other colleagues are pursuing as far as developing new expertise and how you go about learning these new skills. So what we're going to do is we're having an online event Thursday, November 12th from noon until 1 p.m. We'll have a panel of 4 information professionals that are also SLA members, and they are going to be talking about data librarianship, project management in Microsoft Teams, and how they've really identified that as a need, an expertise that they needed to cultivate and to be, relevant within the organizations. And then they'll talk about how they developed those skills. So if you can make it, it's free. Everyone is welcome. And the link is in the chat.
The link
Thank you, Olivia.
in the chat. Yeah, please. I'm happy to help promote it. So please register for that. And we only have just a couple minutes left, and we did not get through all of our questions, but that's okay. I want to take this opportunity to say to each of my panelists, is there anything that you want to say that I did not touch upon? I know you guys probably had notes or things have propped up. So if you had something else that you just want to share with us, now would be the time. And I'll take anyone who has anything.
Well, I want to share something.
Please.
When I first started in the library in this job, I didn't know, again, a lot about the program, and we got feedback from patrons. And I just wanted to share one bit of feedback that we've gotten that has stayed with me all these years. And it's probably one of the best thank yous that I've ever received. And I can't take credit because I'm always trying to tell people I'm not, my job is not just me. There are other people doing this work. But one of our patrons shared that next to God, we were the most important thing in their lives. And I don't think that's something that no one's really ever been, I don't think I could top that. But to be put up there at the same level in their life that they feel about God, I just thought that's something that has always resonated with me. And I remember that more than anything else. And we've received lots of compliments over there. And that's not to say nothing else has ever been important, but just to be up there in our service and in somebody's mind is just tells me and reaffirms what I'm doing, and I'm in the right job.
Nice.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Drew or Tiffany, anything you'd like to add?
I can't top that.
No, you can't.
That was amazing. I would say, actually 2 quick things. One is that working in the federal government is I really enjoy it. I think it's a really nice fit for the skill set. And I've had a lot of really neat opportunities in working, for 3 presidents and through, kind of 4 sets of administrations. I think I got to do presidential summits. I did a lot of work in kind of data management in terms of how we think about how we describe our international relations. And then also now at NASA, which is really kind of amazing. And it's been a really nice fit for that kind of all along. And it's funny because now that it's been a little while since I graduated from library school, I still feel like I am very clearly and obviously a librarian all the time, but I'll meet people and then realize that I've known them for a while and they never knew I was a librarian or that was my background. And I think that sense of kind of having that experience and then kind of in the set of kind of general values that seem to come with people who gravitate toward that career path, it just means a lot to me. And I think that being part of the community, being invited to speak with all of you, I appreciate it, and I'd like to keep participating. And I think it's something where I think it's a really good community to be a part of.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you.
Anne, did you want to say something?
I want to say that the upcoming session is in December on non-traditional library jobs.
December 2nd.
We're really proud of this because Representative Mary Kunesh-Podine, who represents District 41B in the Minnesota House, is going to be one of our panelists. And she is a licensed media specialist. And when the legislature is not in session, she works as a media specialist. And so, and we're hoping also in January, she's going to be a senator. So that would be great. Senator, a Minnesota state senator. So I think that shows you never know where your library path is going to lead you. And she is certainly a superb advocate for us in the legislature. And she obviously subscribes to all our lists, because when she saw our plans for this and a request for people to volunteer, she was right on it. Like the first week the email went out, she contacted Olivia to say, I really want to be on a panel. Okay, Mary, we're happy. So I just think that all of these conversations that we've had over the past few weeks of how did you get to where you are today? You really never know, maybe even where you're going. So I think this real life librarianship has sparked a lot of interest in people across the region. So thanks to everybody for participating, the attendees, as well as, of course, our great panelists. I know a lot of people in Minnesota, so it's fun to have these conversations with Olivia. What about this? Catherine and I started with the state about the same time. And then, whole lots of time passed between when we see each other. So it's fun. I see Drew regularly, which is nice too, because we're a member of Calco as well. So anyway, I just really am enjoying all these real life librarianship series. I missed one, but I hope I'll be at the rest of them. We'll see what.
Well, I agree. This has been a fabulous series so far, and you three in particular have been incredibly enjoyable to talk to. I learned so much. There's very little I knew about all of your jobs, and I feel like it's very illuminating to be able to talk to you all and have this wonderful conversation. So thank you so much for giving your time and doing this for us. We really appreciate it. To all of our attendees, out on your screen again, you see the upcoming events. The next one is November 4th, where we'll be talking with archivists. So that should be a fun one as well. And again, you'll hear from me soon with regards to the evaluation and some links to today's session. So thank you all so much. Enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's been a
Nice
pleasure.
to meet you, Tiffany.
Great to meet all of you.
Tiffany, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Bye.
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 Okay, Olivia.